The night they threw her out, the rain was colder than her mother's eyes. At 13, she stood on the porch clutching a thin backpack and a secret that had already become a scandal. Her father's voice had trembled not with sadness, but with fury. Neighbors' curtains twitched as the door slammed shut behind her, sealing her childhood inside those walls. She was still a child herself, yet life had branded her with a word she barely understood: pregnant, ashamed, disgrace. She walked without knowing where she was going, her small sneakers soaking through, tears blurring the streetlights into halos. Every step felt like falling off a cliff with no ground beneath. The boy who had whispered forever to her had vanished the moment the whispers turned into consequences. Friends avoided her. Teachers lowered their voices when she entered the room. The world that once felt wide and full of promise had narrowed into a single terrifying question. How do you survive when even your home rejects you? An elderly woman who ran a modest bakery found her sitting behind the shop the next morning, pale and shivering. Instead of judgment, the woman offered warm bread and a blanket. It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough to keep her standing. She began sweeping floors in exchange for a corner to sleep in. Her back ached, her feet blistered, but she refused to let bitterness grow roots in her heart. When her son was born, she held him with trembling arms and made a silent vow that he would never feel unwanted. The years that followed were not kind, but they were transformative. She studied at night while her baby slept beside sacks of flour. She endured whispers at the clinic, stares at the market, and the constant weight of proving she was more than her mistake. Slowly, painfully, she finished school through distance courses. The bakery owner became her anchor, reminding her that storms shape mountains. She saved every coin, learned every skill she could, and discovered a fierce strength inside herself that no one had seen before. Not even her opportunities came disguised as exhaustion. A local entrepreneur noticed her discipline and offered her a small position managing inventory for a chain of cafes. She learned about business, about numbers, about leadership. Her son grew into a bright, curious boy who watched his mother with admiration instead of shame. By the time she was 25, she was no longer the frightened girl on the porch. She was composed, educated, and quietly building something extraordinary. She founded her own line of community cafes that hired single mothers and young women in crisis, offering them training and dignity. Her name began to circulate in local news, attached to words like resilience and visionary. And then, one autumn afternoon, a sleek black car rolled slowly into the narrow street she once walked in tears. Neighbors peeked through the same curtains, but this time in confusion. She stepped out wearing confidence like armor, her son, now tall and smiling, at her side. The house looked smaller than she remembered. The paint was peeling. Time had not been gentle there either. When her mother opened the door, recognition struck like lightning. Silence swallowed the space between them. The girl they had cast out stood transformed, not hardened but luminous. She did not come to seek revenge or validation. She came to close a wound that had shaped her life. Calmly, she spoke about the years, about the struggle, about the kindness of strangers. She introduced her son, who greeted his grandparents with innocent politeness, unaware of the history carved into that doorway. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People gathered, whispering the same name they had once spoken with scorn. Shock rippled through them, not because she had failed, but because she had triumphed. The disgrace had become a beacon. She offered her parents no accusations, only a quiet truth. Being thrown out had forced her to find her own foundation. She had built a life from rejection, a future from ruin. As she walked away that evening, she did not look back at the house. She no longer needed to. The greatest shock was not her success, nor the elegant car, nor the headlines that followed her. It was the grace in her voice and the strength in her forgiveness. The 13-year-old girl who once stood in the rain had returned. Not broken, not bitter, but unstoppable. Years passed, and the girl who once stood alone in the rain slowly transformed into a woman shaped by determination rather than despair. Life did not become easy, but it became meaningful in ways she had never imagined. After giving birth, She realized that her son's tiny fingers wrapped around hers were stronger than any promise the world had broken. He became her reason to wake up before dawn, to work longer hours, to study at night when exhaustion tried to pull her into sleep. In the bakery's storage room, under a dim bulb that flickered like a heartbeat, she completed assignments, read textbooks, and prepared for exams while her child slept peacefully beside her on a makeshift bed. The elderly bakery owner continued to support her, offering advice, encouragement, and sometimes extra food when money was scarce. Through perseverance and countless sacrifices, she finished her education, earning qualifications that opened doors she once thought were permanently closed. She began applying for jobs with quiet confidence, no longer the frightened teenager who avoided eye contact, but a focused young professional ready to prove her capabilities. Her first real opportunity came in a small administrative role at a local business, where her discipline and honesty quickly caught attention. She arrived early, left late, and treated every task with seriousness, determined to build a stable future for her son. Over time, her responsibilities grew, and so did her reputation. Colleagues respected her resilience, unaware of the painful journey behind her calm smile. She invested her savings carefully, learning about management, budgeting, and community development. Eventually, she gathered enough experience and courage to start her own small venture, a community-focused service that provided support and employment opportunities for other young mothers facing hardship. Her mission was simple: no girl should feel as alone as she once had. The business grew steadily, not because of luck, but because of integrity and dedication. Customers trusted her, employees admired her leadership, and local media began sharing her story as an example of strength and transformation. By the time she reached her mid-20s, she was no longer defined by the mistakes of her past, but by the success she had built through relentless effort. Her son, now a bright and confident boy, thrived in school and spoke proudly about his mother's work. He knew fragments of the story, enough to understand that courage and kindness had carried them forward. One autumn afternoon, she decided it was time to return to the neighborhood she had left years before. Driving through familiar streets felt surreal, memories rising like shadows from the pavement. When she stopped in front of her childhood home, she did not feel fear, only a calm sense of completion. The house looked older, quieter, almost fragile. Neighbors gathered, whispering as they recognized her face, now composed and radiant with confidence. When the door opened and her parents saw her standing there, time seemed to freeze. The girl they had rejected was no longer vulnerable. She stood tall, independent, and successful. She did not raise her voice or demand apologies. Instead, she introduced her son with dignity, explaining that their past pain had fueled her growth rather than destroyed her. Her presence alone told the story of resilience, forgiveness, and transformation. The shock in the room was not just about her achievements, but about the realization that the child they had cast out had built a life stronger than their expectations. She left that day not seeking validation, but carrying peace in her heart, knowing she had turned rejection into power and abandonment into purpose.